Good evening, everybody. Anne and I will be doing a bit of a double act tonight, swapping over to touch on different aspects of our project. This evening we'd like to brief you on the results of this major international project that finished in June of this year after 3 years. Its focus was the cross-channel cultural connections that existed in the second millennium BC, involving 7 partner institutions from 3 countries, Belgium, France and the UK. The genesis of the project lay in part in the discovery of the Dover Bronze Age boat in 1992. This discovery was reported to the Society by Valerie Fenwick in a paper presented here at Burlington House on the 17th of February 1994. For those of you who were unable to attend that meeting, I shall briefly recap the salient points of the find. Our paper this evening, in some ways, is an update on work concerning the boat 20 years later. The boat was found by my colleague Keith Parfitt during a watching brief during road construction in the heart of Dover. The boat lay perfectly preserved 6 metres below the modern streets in layers of waterlogged silts and tufa silts. Initially given just 24 hours to record and salvage the find, eventually just over 2 weeks were allowed to recover the boat, the importance of which was realised from the moment of its discovery. It was clear during excavation that the boat was incomplete, but it was no shipwreck. It had been deliberately dismantled at the time of its abandonment in antiquity. There was no cargo, though a small piece of shale found on the bottom of the boat proved to be from Kimmeridge Bay in Dorset, perhaps a clue to the range of its operations. Radiocarbon dated to 1575 to 1520 Cal BC, further evidence of its seagoing capabilities lay in a layer of glauconitic sand at the base of the boat, a type of sand that doesn't exist in the Dower Valley at Dover. Eventually, we recovered about 9.5 metres of the vessel's hull, with a maximum width of about 2.2 metres. The northern end of the boat, this end here, could not be recovered for political reasons. The road building scheme was already behind schedule when we found the boat. The boat, as found, essentially consists of 4 oak planks, 2 bottom planks hewn out of half log each and jointed together by a complex system of transverse timbers and wedges, passing under upstanding cleats and rails. 2 curving side planks were stitched to the bottom planks with twisted withers of yew. There was evidence for at least 3 other planks, this complex end board at the end here, and evidence for upper side planks running along each side of the boat. The technology was similar to that of other Bronze Age boats, such as those from Ferriby and Goldcliff, but was in fact very different. To get the boat out of the ground, we had to cut it up into 32 pieces, a hard decision at the time, but it did mean the pieces could fit into a freeze-drying tank at the Mary Rose Trust in Portsmouth, who were thus able to conserve the boat very quickly. The conserved pieces returned to Dover in August 1998, when we started the painstaking business of reassembling all the bits, a labour of trial and error that took some 10 months to achieve. The boat was complete in its new gallery in July 1999, when work could begin fitting out the new gallery of Bronze Age life, the brainchild of the Dover Bronze Age Boat Trust, with financial support from the Heritage Lottery Fund, English Heritage and many others. The new gallery opened in November 1999, just in time for the new millennium, and it's still open. And if you've not been, I really recommend you go and see it. It's quite breathtaking, even to me after all these years. Meanwhile, I've been working with a large multidisciplinary team studying the boat itself. Now, back in the 1990s, nautical archaeology was seen as a quite separate discipline to mainstream or terrestrial archaeology. There was a focus on the technical capabilities and constructional techniques of the hull forms and the types of ship. I was determined that equal attention should be given to the social context of the boat. Who built it and why? Where did it travel to? How was it perceived by contemporary society? To this end, I organised a conference on the 10th anniversary of the discovery entitled The Dover Bronze Age Boat in Context. And it was at this conference that the second strand emerged that was to give birth to the Boat 1550 project. Now, I had been concerned how we could square this huge, complicated, technically sophisticated boat with the kinds of settlement, contemporary settlement that we saw in southern Britain, which seemed to be small, individual farmsteads scattered across the landscape. Why would these kinds of settlements need such an enormous, complicated boat, and how would they mobilise the numbers of people needed to construct it? So this was a bit of a conundrum in my mind, but at the 2002 conference, one of my French colleagues reported on an excavation that had been carried out a couple of years after the Dover boat in 94-95 at Le Mont-Bagarre, near Tarbes on the French coast. Here they'd found a very large enclosed settlement of the same date as the Dover boat, and this rather inspired me. Is this the kind of settlement that would need a boat as big as Dover, that could mobilise the numbers of people needed to build it? Furthermore, Yves de Fossé, the excavator, was intrigued by what appeared to be English-style roundhouses at the site, quite different from the continental rectangular houses known at the time. This was new evidence from commercial archaeology that was to reawaken the interest in cross-channel connections in prehistory. 2 years later, we published the technical monograph of the boat, but even as this appeared in print, I was very aware there were a whole series of questions about the boat that we couldn't answer by studying the timbers alone. Questions of how the complex jointing actually worked, the seaworthiness of the vessel, things like this. And so already, even in 2004, the idea of conducting some experimental archaeology to build a reconstruction of the boat and to put it into the water was already taking shape. 2 years later, another conference in Dover, and this time we looked more squarely at the evidence coming from commercial archaeology and other types of research about cross-channel Bronze Age connections. It was at this conference that Stuart Needham introduced his idea of the maritory, that placed the sea at centre stage of a geographical system that linked communities across the water, maritory being in contrast to territory, of course. It was a seemingly perfect model for the cultural similarities we could see on either side of the channel. I'll hand over to Anne now, who might explain some of this evidence that we were looking at. Anne.
Thank you. Peter will explain later with detail the concept of maritory. For the moment, I will try to explain context, and we will show new data we have collected during the last 25 years between English archaeologists, French archaeologists, and Belgian archaeologists in different contexts and institutions with survey archaeology and academic archaeology. Maritime map, just to show English Dover coast in the front of French coast, Cap Grinet and Cap Blaney in the continent and France. And as we can see, we are neighbors. The distance between cliffs are around 22 miles, so 30 kilometers for French people. So with good lights, especially during winter, we can see Abbot Cliff from Visson, like in the first slide of the presentation. Just to show the strong link between South England and continent is included in we can say maritime roads. Having a clear view of the phenomena is not easy only with archaeological data, but recent discovery help research, especially with preventive archaeology, as we call in French. So, recent excavation in private archaeology brought a lot of information in all periods, but especially for prehistoric Europe and for Bronze Age Transmanche area too. We see an example here with the Canalsen or Lehoerff, a very recent area for excavation. And with those excavations, we can similarities for Bronze Age in funerary practice with big circular burials with 1, 2, or 3 circles. And we have the same data in France, in England, in South England, and in Flanders. As Peter said, Yves de Fossé saw very early questions about settlement and houses, round houses, in quite local scale. In South England and north of France until Normandy, we found specific round houses we don't have behind in the landscape. For artifacts, we can find the same phenomena. In very local scale too, we have similarity with artifacts, local pottery production, metallurgy with Middle Bronze Age access, for example. And in large scale, for skilled craft like gold craft work, archaeologists find the same artifacts in a large area until Portugal in Atlantic area. So, the renewed recognition of some kind of cross-channel communities in the middle of Bronze Age and the desire to create a reconstruction of the double brought itself symbolic of such maritime links, whereas the two key concepts that underlay the both 50-15 BC project concept with a third commonly held concept designed to tell people and share our knowledge. So, in January 2011, we submit a proposal to European Commission in Interreg 42C's program for 36 months project between July 2011 to the end of June, last June. Fortunately, the European Commission accepted the project. So, we made this project with key concepts, developing knowledges on Bronze Age society, studying Middle Bronze Age Manche Mer du Nord or maritime concepts, having a reflection on frontiers concept, developing knowledges on first maritime seafaring in Europe, telling the work of archaeologists, archaeological methodologies today, making promotion of ancient oral society without writing data in official school program in France, England, and Belgium. So, you see the budget included the salaries of all people involved in the project, around 100 people, with 7 partners, 3 countries, 1 lead partner, and a big team. And we had 4 activities and a very important transversality between action and between partners. So partners were the University of Lille, the Canterbury Archaeological Trust, INRAP, the Canterbury Christ Church University, the Conseil Général du Pas-de-Calais, and the ville de Boulogne-sur-Mer. So, in detail now, I will give the time to Peter.
Thank you, Anne.
Continue.
Okay, so one of the major strands of the project was, of course, to build a replica of the boat. I know replica is a bad word, and the boat experts tell me off for this, but in our polylingual way in the project, replica has stuck. Going back to the boat, one of the things we were very keen on was that any reconstruction or replica that we attempted to create was based very, very firmly on the best possible scientific archaeological data. This was critical to us because we were missing parts of the boat, and we would have to therefore speculate on what had been there before. To this end, two very important experts in nautical archaeology and in ancient timber working, Richard Darragh, who's been working with the Dover boat for many years, and Ole Krumlin Pedersen, who was director of the Roskilde Ship Museum, joined the project, and Ole in particular was very, very supportive of the project from its very beginnings. They went back to the original boat timbers, they reassessed the archive, the original archive, and they developed a much more nuanced and better understanding, actually changing an awful lot of some of the original ideas that we published in 2004. And it was on the work, as I say, of Ole and Richard that we really reached a better understanding of what it was we hoped to achieve with the replica. So we started work on a half-scale replica. We did look at building a full-scale, but the logistics of doing that, given our state of knowledge, were really too big for the project. So a half-scale was chosen. We started work in January 2012, had a terrible winter, but we had a fantastic team, Richard there leading his team. But we had problems with it all the time. After the snow and the storms of the early months of 2012, we found we had many visitors, some of whom we couldn't say no to. We had many visiting dignitaries, and of course we had the time team crew who were filming us every day. And all of this conspired to slow us down. But nevertheless, it was a very interesting experience. It was true experimental archaeology, as the team had to reverse engineer from what we understood of the original boat and work out the techniques that enabled us to build something that was true to the archaeological data. It was really fantastic. Unfortunately, the boat was destined to be the centrepiece of a major exhibition about cross-channel contacts in the Bronze Age that was due to open in June 2012, and this opening date was completely fixed. Our French colleagues invited some very important politicians to the opening, and we had to get the boat to Boulogne-sur-Mer, where the exhibition was to be, without fail. So we had also arranged for a launch of the boat, to which we invited the world's press and media. But sadly, this shot here that you can see in front of you is the team working on the boat about an hour and a half before we had to launch it. And we put it in the water, and of course, it just took on water, and we had to pull it out straight away. We tried again the next day, but it wasn't going to work. We just had run out of time. What you don't see there is me being interviewed by the world's press, asking me what I thought about this abject failure. It was an embarrassing day. But even then, we knew that if we'd had a couple of weeks extra, we could have fixed that boat and made it sink. It was the last technical challenge that we just ran out of time for. The boat went to France, and then it went to Belgium, where it was very successful, the centrepiece of the exhibition, and came back a year later. And once we got our hands back on it, we pulled it apart to its constituent planks and rebuilt it, completely recorking it. Now this time we didn't invite the world's press. We took it to a little creek near Faversham, not quite under cover of darkness, but very, very quietly got ready to launch it once again. And this time it floated. And not only did it float, but it behaved beautifully. It was very manoeuvrable, it was very stable, and we just had a marvellous time. We then took it down to Dover, put it in the water in the marina, and took it out to sea. And it behaved absolutely beautiful. Once again, I confess, when we first left the calm waters of the marina, and I saw the huge swells rolling in from English Channel, my heart was in my mouth. as I'm sure it was for the rest of the crew. But actually, this boat, which was based on archaeological evidence, rode the swells beautifully. There was no problem. And for me, that first voyage in the sea convinced me, completely unscientifically, I know, but it was a sea-going boat. It was designed to deal with the sea. And in this reconstruction, we had a good feeling of it. So we had great fun for the rest of that autumn. This summer, we've been taking the boat out every Sunday in training for to move us along. And recently, a couple of months ago now, we took it on a long sea journey from Folkestone, 7 miles along the White Cliffs of Dover, into the port of Dover. Absolutely fabulous day. As you can see, the sea was very calm. We've had worse seas than that, which is very scary. But we were actually making long-distance journeys. And the last voyage of this year was the Great River Race in London, just a few weeks ago now. This was a wonderful event. I don't know if you're familiar with it. There were 332 boats of various kind that raced for 22 miles from the Isle of Dogs in the east of London right round to Twickenham. And our Replica Bronze Age boat did that journey. We were a little bit slower than the other boats. Our Replica weighs about 1 ton. But we didn't come in last. We came in, I think it was 327th out of 332. And we were very proud of ourselves, I must confess. But importantly, it was showing us once again that how the boat behaved in difficult conditions over long distances, and the organisers even gave us a prize, a special prize for sporting prowess. So we are very pleased, and that's hanging up on our wall back in Canterbury. Another aspect of the experimental archaeology went with the project was looking at metallurgy and metalworking, and I'll ask Anne to run that.
Yes, we made experimental metallurgy too, and we worked with Jean Dubos, compagnon du devoir in French, and brilliant craftsman. The objective were, one, to produce data on metallurgy for exhibition with different possible techniques used during Bronze Age. 2, to realize a short film for the exhibition. 2, 3, to calculate time and to look at technique and skill process. So you can see Jean was stone mold and clay mold. Here, operation of firing mold during more than 10 hours, to be sure, having molds without any humidity. Magic mold too, not exactly like the boats, but very, yes, magic mold too. Experimental casting by Jean. Break-in mold, very strategic moment, stone and clay molds to obtain the brut de coulée axe. And last operations after casting and hammering to obtain the finished mold. And thanks to experimental archaeology, both replica and metallurgy, we can understand better, I think, different skilled craft, traditional manufacturing techniques used by naval carpenter and bronze worker. All these results were included in project dissemination. Telling people what was at the heart of the project with different types of action. First, exhibition. First, one important moment between July and June, so 1 year and a half. It was a very important action in the project, this international exhibition. It was a real big challenge to organize in very short planning, 12 months, with a masterpiece, the replica of the boats. And for this exhibition, we worked with a design Belgian agency, Cassen, elected by an international competition. Big challenge. First, 3 pieces. One difficulty was having these 3 places and 3 very different ones. One old castle, one very modern and big place, and one museum without space enough to show the replica, but with the real Bronze Age boat. Key concept of the exhibition and challenges: 3 languages, it's an obligation of Europe Commission. 3 exhibition places, 3 categories of public, so colleagues, we can say, large public and children. 7 sequences, the boat replica as a masterpiece, artifacts from many archaeological sites with some masterpiece gold and ice-level securities. Just to show a little bit the design and sequences. 1, the boat in its time to show a long-term perspective of the boat. Sequences 1, 2, inside the same place. Tools to understand the average survival rates of different material over time and long-term chronology, and to show it, for example, an half beam and an abacus of generation for large public and for children in all sequences. Boats, obviously a large focus on the boats and the boat in its time. Sequences with craftsmen and wood to explain technology around the boats and skill-craft. Both in the context with travels, the life during Bronze Age, and games for children, for example here, how it's possible, what you put in the menu during Bronze Age. And for children, it was terrible to realize it was impossible to eat chocolate, for example, during Bronze Age, or grapes. Ritual of the Bronze Age, important and difficult sequence to explain to people. And we put all sequences and all information with very new artifacts in the catalogue we published in 3 languages with 7 chapters, like 7 sequences. Just to show a little bit the organization of the logistic of the exhibition with good moments and with delicate moments, with special problem with doors, especially to put, you see here, behind the replica and the beam vehicle, you see, and the boat is behind, just because we found 2 small doors to put the boat in the museum, so it was necessary to find solution. But problem exists only to be resolved, so we found solution during all the projects. A new problem is door, for example, and we found solution. Finally, the replica as a masterpiece in 2 places, Boulogne-sur-Mer and Enam in Belgium. Just to show a little bit the team, because installing an exhibition with an international team is a wonderful human experience too. And I would like to take this occasion to thank again teams we had in 3 places. So here with colleagues, with Andrew, who is in the room today, to have a wonderful result. And we are proud about the exhibition, and I think the best compliment we received was in June during the opening from our colleague Ben Roberts, involved in the project. And he said to us, I had a dream about an exhibition on Bronze Age, and we realized it was, yes, great compliment. We organize two scientific conferences, one in Boulogne-sur-Mer and one in Dover. During the project, we organize public lecture during the time of the exhibitions in France, in Belgium, in England, very open to the public, and with the team of the project and with guests too. And during the project, we gave an attention to large public and to children public with open days, with specific activities in the exhibition, with a booklet for children. And to finish the project and to open it to the future, we create both kits for children in England, France and Belgium, based on activity and results in exhibition and more. We wrote a consequence guide. We put real artifacts through Replica methodology, pottery, and was the idea the future of archaeology is in schools with children, European citizens of tomorrow. So now the project is finished and not finished. Officially it's closed, but its life continues with kids. And in the team we still to be with more questions and who would like to find solutions. So I will let Peter to conclude with operation and question in the future.
Okay. Now I can remember where the buttons are. We started off by talking about the idea of the maritory, of Stuart Needham's idea. This inspired a lot of us thinking about it. But I have to ask now, in retrospect, did we find our maritory? Now, after all this time, I rather think that I and others have rather hijacked the term and used it in a way that Stuart himself did not really intend. Stuart was arguing from a very specific data set, the exotica of the early Bronze Age, amber, jet, faïence, tin, gold, shale, and more specifically the special cups he discussed at some length in the preliminary report on Ringlemew. In this, he specifically saw the interpersonal or intergroup relations being facilitated within the Channel Southern North Sea, or CSNS, maritory, driven by what he called cosmologically driven exchange. The concept of the maritory was a form of geographic system that embraced belief systems and practices, and specific practices over and above the physical and mechanical aspects of interaction. And indeed, he specifically maintained that a maritory should not be analogous to a culture zone. He envisaged, as you can see in this slide, maritory as a zone of privileged or relatively high flux interaction used for the execution of certain specialist maritime exchanges. Now, we, of course, during the course of our project, did indeed present evidence for what we think is a transmanche culture zone, with apparently very deep levels of cultural similarity in many spheres, ceramics, metalwork, funerary practices, domestic architecture and so on, and at seemingly many levels of society. If we apply the term maritory to this culture zone, we are extending the meaning of Stuart's term and ignoring some of the nuances of his argument. Now, this wasn't lost on Stuart Needham, who saw his idea of the CSNS maritory as an explanation of how the later culture zone initially developed, which he described as the Channel Bronze Age, and Cyril Marcigny as the Manche Mer du Nord complex, and myself as Le Peuple de la Manche, a vast technological complex on the shores of the area of the Manche and the Mer du Nord. So we still use the term maritory, even though we're using it incorrectly. And I'm not particularly sure that this genie can be put back in the bottle, the term maritory is too useful in relation to maritime interaction networks or maritime cultural zones, giving its emphasis on the importance of taking into account cultural belief systems and perceptions in trying to explain such phenomena. However, though there seems to be a lot of evidence that does suggest a maritime culture zone in the Transmanche area that may have arisen from Stuart's CSNS maritory, evidence that we presented as a central theme of the Boat 1550 project, there is still much work that we need to do. I think that we are all aware in the project team that we need to be more rigorous with our data. Have we just been cherry-picking those elements that seem to demonstrate cross-channel connections, whilst ignoring possibly the bulk of evidence that doesn't suggest it? We need more quantitative analysis to support the concept of our Transmanche cultural zone. Furthermore, I don't think that we have really explored the theoretical basis of how such a putative maritime cultural zone maintained itself over time. Stuart Needham may have given us clues as to how it came into being, but such apparently powerful and deep-rooted cultural similarities across the seas needs explanation in terms of the social practices that made it possible. Ethnographic parallels, anthropological and social theory need to be harnessed to further develop the model of a cross-channel community. We also need to address the issue diachronically. For example, Catherine Freeman's work on the exotic flint daggers of the early Bronze Age show that cross-channel cultural connections existed before Stuart Needham's maritory, and that these geographical connections changed over time. Similarly, we might think more on what happened to cause the demise of our Manche Mer du Nord cultural complex, and what followed after. And so, if we are to expand the concept of maritory to relate to these maritime culture zones, then we need to articulate this more specifically, and the elements of a maritory set out in Stuart's article should be reviewed and, if necessary, expanded with a more robust identification of the necessary elements in the archaeological record. So I think these are challenges that the project has thrown up for us for the future. But we did achieve quite a lot in the project. First of all, unquestionably, we developed a more nuanced understanding of the original Dover boat, its methods of its construction and its seafaring capabilities. We brought together, we collated both new and old evidence for cross-channel cultural contact during the second millennium BC. And some of the stuff that was in our exhibition that we published in the catalogue had never been seen in public before. Some of it had been sitting in a bank vault for 25 years. So it was very good to bring all this stuff together and to produce what I think is a very important and worthwhile catalogue. Also importantly, the development of connections between researchers in both the academic and the commercial archaeological worlds in the Transmanche zone. And I'm very pleased to report that we can see this expanding to this day, not just in Bronze Age studies, but in other periods, in Anglo-Saxon, in the Iron Age, in Neolithic, medieval studies. There is a much greater awareness of the fact that there was contact across the channel and that we need to be aware of parallels and connections throughout time. And the fourth thing that I think was a major achievement was the far-reaching public outreach and education programme, which promoted our common cultural heritage on either side of the channel and invited people to reflect on modern-day socio-political concerns. All we see on the television these days in terms of the channel is conflict with immigrants. We see castles of various periods dotting the cliffs from the Second World War way back. We can use archaeology to challenge these ideas of frontier, boundary and difference, both in the schools and for the general public. Now, Anne's mentioned the future, so just want to quickly touch on that. The project has created what I think will be lasting legacies. The educational kits and the supporting documentation that Anne mentioned will be used in classrooms in the 3 countries in the Transmanche area long after the end of the project. This is a long-term educational asset that I'm sure will be very important. Also, in terms of education, the replica boat will be presented at public events, at exhibitions, boat shows, regattas. Maybe you'll even do the London River Race again, I don't know. And this will take place throughout the Transmanche area to enhance appreciation and engagement with our common maritime heritage. And it will be great fun to do that. Another thing that we're looking forward to, and already Anne and I are working on new collaborative projects to study our Transmanche maritory in the longue durée, to articulate the mechanisms by which these entities maintain themselves, and also to improve the methodologies of recording and analysing ancient ship remains, which still remains problematic. And lastly, and this is really an aspirational pipe dream of mine, is I'd like to excavate the missing end of the original Dover boat. Remember me saying the northern end we never got. It's been the bane of my life for 20 odd years, that. I know exactly where it is. I'd like to go back and dig down. It's only 2 metres down now. And with the information from that excavation and with everything we learned about the half-scale replica, I also dream of building a full-scale replica and to take that across the channel itself. And also, through our experimental work with the boat and other things, I'd like to conduct formal scientific sea trials on our replica. I want to do more laboratory studies of the mechanical characteristics and physical behaviour of early boats. That's still an area that's very lacking in hard empirical knowledge, and that's something that I hope to take forward with my colleagues across the water. So there we have it. That's our project. One of the greatest things about the project that Anne has alluded to has been that network of friendships and camaraderie that's developed over the last 4 years. All of us in the team cannot conceive that we could just walk away from the project now that it's finished. We talk about the boat family now. We go to each other's houses, we go to weddings, we look after each other's children. We've become a very close group of friends and colleagues who will continue to work into the future, both in terms of the Bronze Age and I'm sure in many other periods. But for now, I shall stop talking. Thank you very much for listening to us.
Peter, and thank you both very much indeed. Having seen the telly programme where it did sink, I was thrilled to see all those pictures. I'm delighted to hear you had success in your Thames boat race. It was great. And I really would like to know at some point how you did get it through that door. It's not an impossibility. I'm sure there are some more profound questions that somebody would like to ask.
Okay, I've got my list here. Anne's writing something. The Falmouth boat. Yes, I actually sat on the advisory committee for that project from its very earliest inception. And I know Robert van der Noort very well, and I went down and met the team and everything. I think there is indeed a difference between this half-scale replica and the full-scale replica that was achieved in Falmouth. That had very distinct objectives relating to the National Maritime Museum in Falmouth about community engagement and promoting the museum within the local community. But from the very outset of that project, I remember talking to the shipwright, whose name I can't remember now, a very nice gentleman. From the outset, that project had the understanding it was going to build a boat. And I've seen the team give papers about it, but I remember at that very early meeting sort of saying, hey, wait a minute, you know, it is based on data that comes from the Ferriby boats from Yorkshire. But in its initial conception, they were always prepared to ignore the archaeological evidence, that the shipwright I remember distinctly at the meeting him saying to me, well, if I don't like the lines of the boat, we will change the lines of the boat until I am satisfied, because I am a shipwright of 40 years' experience. Now, that was absolutely perfect, and the project was a superb success within the framework of what it was set out to do. But it was very different to Dover in that we really, really tried to be as strictly according to the archaeological data. And one of the things that I found really exciting about it is that we didn't set out to build a boat so much as to find out what the original timbers were telling us about the shape of the timbers, etc. And almost by chance, we created this wonderful, beautiful, seaworthy boat. So it was very satisfying as an exercise in experimental archaeology that had quite different objectives to what Robert was doing in Falmouth. So that's my first point. Do we want to go to Dorset, or Devon, I should say, and get some shower? Well, I can take orders, madam. And I would love to go down the coast. It would be beautiful. And when the weather is right, it is a joy to be out at sea in that little boat. But maybe I'd rather build a full scale first before quite such a long journey. Coastal trade, I think, of course, an awful lot of... I think the boat must have been used for coastal trade. I think, without having any proof whatsoever, I think we have to understand these boats in terms of the redistribution of the raw materials for bronze, for tin and things like that. It's got to be going down to the southwest, I suspect. And our little fragment of Kimmeridge shale is a nice little pointer to that. But when you were in Dover, and as Anne was saying, well, look, there's France, it's over there. And we know about the cultural crossings that went from artefacts and things. It seems a bit silly not to think it could also cross the Channel to France. Was the Channel much narrower in the Bronze Age? Well, discuss. There's a lot of people who try and argue about the idea of it might have been shallower and there were lots of little islands that you could hop across, etc. But to be quite frank, the balance of evidence for me is that scouring of the Channel by the second millennium was well advanced. I don't believe it was particularly different to what it is now. There's some debate about the amount of cliff erosion that's been going on, but nobody agrees on it. But I think we have to go a long way back in time to see a different kind of channel to what we see today. I take the point about navigation. Yes, of course, those currents are horrendous. And if you've ever been trying to paddle back into Dover Harbour when the tide is going out and there's a wind gusting 20, 30 knots into you with no keel, it can get very scary out there. And yes, you must have enormous knowledge about what was happening. In terms of maps of the prehistoric Dower, no, we haven't got very far with it. We have good understanding, I think, about the nature of the Dower in prehistory. It was a thin, braided stream, freshwater stream. We didn't have a big channel, but we really haven't got the data yet, I think, to actually start mapping out. Though Martin Bates, as you know, continues to do interesting work there. But no, we haven't got the atlas of how the Dower developed at an earlier period just yet. Okay, going through my list. Mast. No evidence of a mast. Of course, it's possible they may have a mast, but in general, we go for the idea of the minimum construction if we have no evidence. If you're in that boat, if you hold up a leafy branch, if the wind is behind you, you're going to get extra. And Paul Bennett, when he stands up in the boat, we always get a couple of extra knots. But we can't go there because that is pure speculation, to the point of being fantasy, and we try and avoid that. The shipwreck we were talking about was the Langdon Bay Hoard, which is on display in Dover Museum. And just recently that's been published by Stuart Needham and others. And yeah, we find these hoards at the bottom of the sea. There's some debate, are they from shipwrecks or are they ritual deposits out at sea? On balance, I think the feeling is they are in fact for shipwrecks. But it always irritates me immensely to see things in the press that go shipwreck found, off the coast of Dorset. And you get there, of course, what they found is a pile of bronze axes at the bottom of the sea with no sign of a boat whatsoever. But the press always not only interpret them as the cargoes of shipwrecks, but describe them as shipwrecks, when of course there's no trace of the ship or boat whatsoever. Do you want to say? Okay. Yes. I think I've gone through the list there. One thing is that Anne has donated some of her books to the library. We get them to the librarian a little earlier on, and one of those is, of course, a copy of the exhibition catalogue. So hopefully, once that's processed and in the library, I recommend that everybody have a look at it because it's good stuff.
Fantastic, that's very generous. Thank you very much indeed. That's wonderful. And thank you both very much indeed. I think you can tell from the range and breadth of questions that you stimulated a lot of interest. I spoke earlier about the importance of collaborative projects and interdisciplinary projects, and I think you've given us a wonderful example of just what can come from a lot of people working from very different perspectives on one topic. And I must say, I was interested to see your research questions at the end, because while you were talking, I was thinking, so how long is this phenomenon? And is the concept of maritory something that's being explored elsewhere? So I was very interested to see those questions as something that you're posing for the future. And I think what's also great is not only you've obviously pursued a lot of research, which has been important and is going to inform studies of the Bronze Age in the future, but you've also done education outreach. It's all those great pictures of the public and children and so forth, which is great. And obviously, what we're very interested in promoting here at the Society, not simply we want excellence in research, but we want research that's going to inform, engage everyone. So I think also that I felt the legacy of your project, I enjoyed that, the idea that it's actually promoted fellowship, and not only within this project, but in other aspects of your work and in your organisations. There is a benefit, which I think is really a lesson for us all. So I wish you very well with the future of your project, and particularly in your aspiration to dig the end. Thank you very much indeed.